before I forget, so I have to record our lectures, so just in case there are those who are not present for class. And you can go to your LMS and you can indicate your attendance for today. For your grading system, I have indicated sa inyong LMS. Let's see. So for the lecture, you will have 30% would come from your midterm exam, 30% for your final exam. So that would be 60% for the major exam, and 40% would come from your quizzes. So quizzes, assignments, problem sets. So if you submitted all your quizzes and assignments 40%, no, so you only actually have to get 10% for your midterm and final. And if you get, of course, perfect sa inyong quizzes. And the passing grade is actually 50%, but you have to take note that 60% of your grade would come from the lecture and 40% would come for your laboratory. So what you will get from this lecture will only be 60%, and you will have to do your part for some of the laboratory activities. And so I think attendance will come from the 40% or set aside for that quizzes and problem sets. So you indicate your attendance in the or reference books is indicated in your LMS. You can check our primary reference material is the Little High Introduction to Organic Chemistry, Biochemistry. So you can start in there. For our outline, so we'll be talking about stages. Will be have an introduction course for the organic chemistry, biochemistry, and then we'll talk about per chapter on all the biomolecules. Okay, so we'll be talking about the introduction to biochemistry. But of course, I expect that you already know what are the mission, goals, objectives of the university. And I have already mentioned on the grading system. I have already mentioned, so it's indicated in there. So again, your final grade would come from 60% of the lecture and 40% from the laboratory. Of course, if you get 50% at least minimum, you'll have get a grade of 3, and if you get 94% combined from the lecture and the lab, minimum 94%, you get a 1.0 grade. So you can get your lecture notes from the link I have posted in the LMS. If you have questions and concern, you can send me a message via your LMS, or you can send me a message sa thread that we have already mentioned. Okay, you can reply to that thread. If you have questions, or you can send me a message via the email da.com/ph. And if you want to have some clarifications, whatever questions you will ask, or you can add me sa messenger. I think some of you message me, no, sa, I can't remember, sa LMS ata to, no, actually, I can send a message with the LMS, but the thing is, I have too many students sa LMS, and hindi na ako search, no, I have to search by name. So that's why I have created this. All your email address are saved to this. You can reply to all, or you can reply to me. So I can only just only me who can read. If you reply to all, then everyone will also read your questions or inquiries. Okay, or you can add me sa my pasnig for immediate messaging. But also in your phone, you can easily check your emails naman. Okay, so what else? So for our course outline, we start with the introduction to biochemistry, and then we'll be talking about the different biomolecules by chapters. After the introduction, we'll be talking about proteins, carbohydrates, lipids, enzymes, gene. Hopefully we can get to gene expression for each chapter, for each biomolecule. Actually, it's very happy. And depending also with the timeline given to us, we hope that we can be up to chapter 3 before the exam. If we still have time, depending on the agreement of the department also, but if we'll be lacking time, I'll be using your laboratory time to make up for the lecture classes. Okay, so to start, we'll be talking about the introduction to biochemistry. So again, I haven't checked individually if you really finished or passed your Chem 36, that's organic chemistry. Maybe later I will check, because if any one of you I would find that haven't taken yet the organic chemistry, then definitely I will have to drop you from this course. Okay, so biochemistry. So biochemistry is simply the chemistry of life. The word bio, okay, that's life, and chemistry. Of course, we know what chemistry is. We'll be talking about reactions, structures, what else, changes, interactions. Okay, so bio, that means life. We'll be talking about living systems. Okay, so if we apply chemistry to biological systems, then we'll be talking about chemical substances found in living organisms, the interactions of those substances in living systems, the structures of those substances present in living systems and living organisms. What are the interactions or the chemical reactions that would be possible in living organisms? What are the transformations, of course? What are the processes involved in biological systems? So that is all about biochemistry. And molecules are lifeless, of course, we know that, no? Yet in appropriate complexity and number, molecules compose living things. Okay, so all of us, we are living things, we are living organisms. We are composed of molecules, and a very discrete particles, we have the atoms, which make up all the molecules. So for living systems, there are actually distinctive properties. And living things, living systems are actually complicated and highly organized. There is these biological structures that would have functional purposes. Of course, yeah, you know that from your biology course. And living systems are actively engaged in energy transformations. Of course, we saw the process, how living system change, and the energy that's being involved when we undergo changes. Of course, it started from very small small organism, no, to us now being a full-blown living system. So we have the living systems like us have a remarkable capacity for self-replication. So us and our other living systems, they do replicate. So examples of living things that we can find, of course, you have the plants, animals, bacteria, fungus, protists, and the non-living things. Of course, you have your water, soil, air, minerals. Of course, these are all made up of molecules, and all living things also is made up of molecules. So you have to think what would make living things and non-living things different from each other. If, for example, water is made up of the H2O molecule, soil, of course, is made up of particles, and of course, made up of molecules. Notice those are inorganic substances present in there, and of course, the minerals. So you will have to ask what would be the difference between living things and non-living things. And of course, for one, you have to know that living things have the ability to replicate, right? Even bacteria, no? Viruses is not living, but they also replicate. And they are actively engaged in energy transformation. So we have a system, and it's very complex, it's very complicated, highly organized. For example, us, no, as we belong to the animal kingdom, as the human species, for instance, our body is complexly organized, no? We have the whole system, and then we have systems, no? For example, what have you learned in the biology? I forget. You have the, for example, the nervous system. What else? Can you remember your biology? That would be attributed, would have different hierarchy. For example, you will have your system, you will have your organs, no, to tissues, to cells, and the basic could be for the cells. And later we'll be talking about the basic unit for living system, which is the cell. So for living systems, there are essential elements, no, for us to be living now. For human body, majority is of course water. Majority of our body is made up of water, and that will be H2O. So you will see here that majority of the element for human body is H and oxygen, because the molecule or the substance that is present in our system is usually made up of water. Most of the component of our system is made up of water. The rest are organic molecules, and then some elements. So you have organic molecules that will be made up of carbon. So that will be the next element, which is highly present in the human body. And of course, nitrogen, because most of the organic molecules in the body is made up of nitrogen. We'll see that later, which we can find in proteins. And then the minerals in our body that can be found rather in the bones, which is calcium. So you have next higher percent would be calcium next to nitrogen, and then other elements. And for the earth, the greater proportion will go to the oxygen. The oxygen element, of course, is the one that without oxygen, it's hard for us to breathe here on Earth. And silicon rather, for the rest. And then, of course, for seawater, majority is, of course, it's water, but there are ions that will be present in seawater. So, in your organic chemistry class, you've learned of the different classes or families of organic compounds. So you have your aldehydes, ketones, carboxylics acid, carboxylics or carboxylates. Now, if there's hydrogen here, it's carboxylate. And then you have your alcohols, you have your ethers, you have your ROR esters, C double bond OOR, And carboxylic acid, two carboxylic acids, you call it anhydride. And if you have C double bond O CH3, you have your acetyl group. Amides or amido, these are the functional group of atoms that will be present in the classes for organic compounds and so on. And then the other alkyl groups, you have methyl, ethyl, and so on. Depending on the number of carbon atoms and the ring system, you have your phenyl group. So in naming the organic compounds, there's different priorities, of course. You have your carboxylic acids will be the highest priority, ester, amides, and so on. And that's how when you name your organic compounds, right? Remember that in your organic chemistry. So these are still your organic compounds classes. Now you have again mentioned your aldehydes, ketones, carboxyl group, the alcohol, the ether, the esters. These are the common group of atoms or functional groups that you will find in biomolecules or the organic compounds that we find in biological systems, the amido and the amide. And by the way, if you notice that I sent you three links for the Zoom, because before I usually do meetings via Google Meet, where I can record up to almost infinity. But for now, there's no recording in Google Meet, so I'm using Zoom. Hope I can find the screen recorder. I just don't have to stop our meeting again and join again. So when this meeting ends, I'd like you to click again the second link that I gave you, and then we start our discussion. Okay, so these are some of the common other class of organic compounds, and there are those that would have the presence of sulfhydryl group, SH, SS, disulfide, diester. So instead of esters where you have oxygen, there's this oxygen. And in some of the organic compounds, there's actually this phosphoryl group that we can find. It's a chain of phosphoryl group. So P double bond OOO. Okay. And you can actually find this in ATPs later when you have your talk about DNAs and other biomolecules. And you can also find, for example, you find a very complex organic compound, and there are different functional groups that you can find. For example, thioester, amido group, methyl. It's important that you are able to identify those functional groups that are present, okay? Because that will identify the class of biomolecules that will be present in your body. So for this case, this is an acetyl coenzyme. It's an enzyme. It's very short chain, and you have to remember how to determine, of course, the formal charge of each atom. You always have to remember the valency of each atom. Carbon should always have 4 bonds. Nitrogen should just have 3 bonds with a lone pair. Oxygen should just have 2 bonds with 2 lone pairs. So to always follow the octet rules. Okay, in your organic chemistry, you've learned that most of the organic compounds can be chiral, which means that they have chiral centers. You have to remember that what is a compound that would make it chiral, or how would an organic compound be made chiral? It should always be a chiral center. A chiral carbon should be bonded to 4 different group of atoms. And then how can the molecule become charged or neutral? Of course, you will have to check on the overall molecule. Would it be charged or will it be neutral? What will be the total charge of the system? So there is a lot of negative. For example, if oxygen is only bonded to 1 bond, and there are 6 lone pairs, of course, so that oxygen will bear a negative charge. And then we have to know for the overall molecule, will the molecule be charged or will it be neutral? But if you see in some other sites, instance, for example, that the other atoms would have a positive charge, so you'll have to add the total positive and negative charge for the overall molecule. Okay, so here you have to review what are the chiral centers because the majority of the organic compounds are chiral. Okay, and because I have mentioned that we have mentioned it in organic class, no, that there are receptors in our body that is very specific chiral. The orientation and the arrangement of the group of atoms in space is very specific, no? Even if the same iyahang connectivity, but there is different orientation in space. Like for example, if you remember, the same molecule that would have different configuration of having R and an S, no? So that will have a different our system, our body may not be able, living systems may not be able to recognize that organic compounds because living systems having receptors which are made up of, again, organic molecules are also chiral. So that's why we have to remember always the organic compounds being a chiral compound, and how would a chiral compound or an organic compound become a chiral compound. Okay, so we'll be dismissed. I will dismiss this and we'll continue with the next meeting. If you remember what our stereochemistry and chirality is, no? So chiral molecules belong to either being enantiomers or diastereomers. And you remember that for compounds having the same molecular formula but different connectivity of the atoms, you will have constitutional isomers. They have different connectivity of the atoms. For example, this case, you will have constitutional isomers, but they have the same connectivity, but different orientations in space. For all the group of atoms, you have the stereoisomers. And then from that, if they differ by rotations about single bonds, you'll have conformational isomers. But if they don't differ by rotation due to the single bonds, then you have configurational isomers. And you will have configurational isomers that would come being enantiomers or being diastereomers. Okay. So you have to remember again of the stereochemistry, what we can find that in most of the objects at home, not even your body. For example, your left and your right hand almost looks like the same. But when you try to superimpose them, front, no, both front, only the middle finger will actually fit and all the other fingers don't, no. And here is an example of bromochloroiodine. So for carbon atom, it's bonded to 4 different group of atoms, no. And if you look at the mirror image of this organic compound here, you will notice that in the mirror image, no, ang front anemia would you can find this front here and side, and the mirror image of this wouldn't be superimposed. For example, this structure and this structure is a mirror image of this. And try to superimpose them. This is the itsura niya, no? So only the carbon and the hydrogen, carbon, iodine will be superimposed, but fluorine and bromine will not be. And you get the mirror image. Because of that, of course, you consider this compound to be a chiral compound, and the two compounds that are not superimposable to each other, you call that enantiomers. You review that on your organic chemistry. So one property that you can find for organic chiral compounds, no, if they have different configuration, particularly for enantiomers. For example, they have one would have a configuration of R and the other would be S. And configuration, they have the same connectivity for this carbon atom, but the only difference is there is a different orientation in space. And we can find a lot of this in organic, in biological systems. No? So there is a different perception in the body. One will be spearmint. No, there is a different taste for that and the other. For example, one would have different odor and the other would be different. And one And even for drugs, you can also find that drugs can also be chiral. So the differing biological properties or aroma of this are due to stereospecificity, able to differentiate them between stereoisomers of the biomolecules receptors. So for the R first carbon example here, spearmint, so there's a different odor than the other. They would have different aroma. Why is that? Now, when our body receptors, for example, in our nose, and we try to recognize this compound, even they have different orientation in space, even if they have the same connectivity but different orientation in space, the receptors in our nose would recognize this two differently. So for example, one, we can smell this to be like kind of mint, and the other would have a different odor. So that's one. That's how our body would recognize chiral compounds. You can also see that for drugs. Now, one drug could be effective. For example, if you remember ibuprofen, there's only a specific configuration where it can be effective in the body, and the other wouldn't be. In some cases, the other stereoisomer could also be detrimental to the body. So example is this organic compound here. You call this one L-aspartyl L-phenylalanine methyl ester. It's a very complex compound. The common name of this is aspartame, the one that we use in sweeteners. Okay, and here you will see that our body would recognize this one as sweet. And you look at which carbon compound here is the chiral center. And you notice that this will be the chiral center.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yes.
Wala po'y shared screen, ma'am. Imurang na akong among makita. Nabay shared screen na imong i-discuss, ma'am.
Ganina ra ko nag-discuss, wala ko screen. Ganina
Yes,
ra ko
ma'am.
kayo.
Nag-chat po ni sa ano, ma'am. Nag-chat po ni
Wala,
sa message box. Nga walay shared screen. Maybe wala lang po
Bitaw
ni
na mura ra
manabantay
mo
ng
mga
language.
kuan. Kaganina ra ko nag-discuss, nag-share sa akong screen niya. Karon pa mo nang reklamo. Sa mga puutan ninyo.
Naa po
siya
sa ano,
kaganina.
ma'am, inbox chat.
When I am discussing, please feel free to interrupt me, because when I do my discussion, I don't read. I will just be focused on the slides, and I don't. The message doesn't appear. Doesn't interrupt me. 12:26. Pero kaganina na ba?
naa ma'am, pero kadali lang.
Kana na.
Naa na ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. Ana, ma'am.
Ganina ra ako nagyayo sa structure, so gin mo ng reklamo. Anyway, for the next time when I am discussing and you have questions, feel free to make some sounds, no? If you look at my screen, if I'm looking at my screen, I don't see anything except a full-blown screen. Okay, so when again, when I'm discussing, feel free to make a sound. Okay, so again, we only have a few minutes left for this link sa Zoom, no? And if mawala ang Zoom meeting, then please again click the second link that I sent via email or via Elements. Okay. So again, you just have to remember for the organic compounds, which are chiral, and most of the organic compounds actually that our body would handle, our living systems would handle, are chiral compounds. So what are chiral compounds? If you remember in organic chemistry, it is for an organic compound having a carbon bonded to 4 different group of atoms. For example, here you have bromochloroiodomethane. And so by the way, when I was talking about the class of organic compounds, you don't see the structures. Tama ba ko? You see the structures? Anyway, so you just have to review on that structures, no? What are the different class of organic compounds? Tingog mo, guys. Okay. You are, if I am not mistaken, you are BS Ed students, tama ba?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
Yeah, so
ma'am.
you are soon to be teachers. So pagsaba-saba mo because you're soon to be teachers when you finish your program. So feel free to speak your mind and ask questions. No? Do not be do not put a barrier to yourself, no, to learn more and ask questions. And if you want to have some complications. Anyway, again, so since I have already passed the slides, we just have to review the different functional groups that you learn in organic chemistry. Some of them, you can find a lot of functional groups even in one structure. So you have to know what are those functional groups, and you have to ask also yourself if the organic compound would have a chiral center. And some we've learned in organic chemistry, of course, that organic compounds that have the same molecular formula but different connectivity, you have constitutional isomers. If the same lang yung connectivity, you have the stereoisomers. And different orientation in space can have your, of course, configurational isomers, the stereomers, and enantiomers. I've learned that in organic chemistry, what are the difference of the two, the stereomers and enantiomers. Okay, and of course, just by rotation of the bonds, just have your conformational isomers. So if your organic compound has a carbon and bonded to 4 different group of atoms, then that carbon becomes a chiral center, and that's what makes it chiral compound. Okay, so if you look at the mirror image of this, okay, so hydrogen, iodine, bromine, chlorine in the front, and you try to superimpose. This is your image, and this is your original compound, mirror image. You try to superimpose these two compounds, two mirror images of this compound. You will notice that only these 3 atoms can be superimposed and the other cannot be. So the overall molecule is not superimposable. So for those compounds that are not superimposable in mirror image, you call them to be enantiomers. And they would have different configuration, of course. You've learned that one could be R and the other could be S. Okay, just like this one. And one of the properties again is that our body would perceive it differently. For example, in terms of water or aroma, one we could smell as mint and the other would have a different odors. Why is that? Because biological properties of this are due to stereospecificity. And again, our system, about the receptors in our body are able to differentiate them. Okay, even for drugs, no, our body would be able to recognize which drug can be useful or not, even if they have the same connectivity. For example, the taste also aside from odor. The aspartame here, this is the structure, which is very big. And you'll just focus on this structure here, which is a chiral center. So this carbon is bonded to 4 different group of atoms. You can see my cursor. You have this group, hydrogen, and this group. So that's 4 different group of atoms, and this carbon here is chiral. When our system, our taste buds, our tongue tastes this one, it's very sweet. In fact, aspartame is an artificial sweetener is being added to our drinks, no, our drinks, no, juice, cola,